You can sit down, but don't fool yourself. You are not welcome. My son's words hit my soul like hammers. There I was, in the most elegant restaurant in the city, surrounded by my family, who looked at me as if I were a beggar. What none of them knew is that I had paid for every last dollar of that dinner. If this story moves you, subscribe. Every day there's a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you're watching from. My name is Edward Miller. I'm 62 years old. And that night, I discovered that a father's love can become the greatest humiliation of his life. I was at the Royal Steakhouse, one of those places where each plate costs what I earned in a week when I started working. My son Ryan had organized his 35th birthday dinner there. I arrived on time as always, wearing my best light blue shirt, which I had ironed 3 times that afternoon, and the black shoes I shined until they gleamed like mirrors. When I walked into the restaurant, I felt the air conditioning hit my face, and my shoes sounded different on the marble floor. I saw the large table at the back, decorated with white tablecloths and crystal glasses that reflected the golden lights from the ceiling. My whole family was there. Ryan, in his designer gray suit that I knew cost more than my 2-month salary, his wife Jessica in a red dress that made every waiter turn to look at her, and my 8-year-old grandson, Sam, playing on his tablet while waiting for the food to arrive. I walked toward the table with my heart pounding, carrying the gift I had bought for Ryan, an Italian leather wallet that had cost me $150, money I had saved by selling used parts at the garage where I worked on weekends. "Happy birthday, son," I shouted from a distance, holding up the gift wrapped in gold paper, but when I reached the table, Ryan didn't even get up from his chair. He looked me up and down, as if evaluating whether I deserved to be there, in that elegant place where he felt like a king. "You can sit down," he said in a cold voice I had never heard from him, pointing a finger at an empty chair at the other end of the table, as far away from him as possible. "But don't fool yourself, Dad. You are not welcome here." The words hit my stomach like stones. The noise of the restaurant continued. The waiters kept walking, the music kept playing, but for me, everything had stopped. Jessica froze, my in-laws looked down, and Sam, my little grandson, asked with that soul-crushing innocence, "Why are you talking to Grandpa like that, Daddy?" I just stood there like an idiot, feeling the shame rise from my feet to my head. The tables next to us had turned to look. An older woman looked at me with pity, as if she had witnessed something she shouldn't have seen. The waiter who was approaching to take our order discreetly moved away, realizing that something very personal and painful was happening at that table. I could only walk to that empty chair, dragging my feet as if they weighed tons, wondering what I had done so wrong for my own son to treat me like a stranger. What Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I had been in that same restaurant exactly 1 week before. I had spoken with Mr. Thompson, the manager, a man my age who reminded me of my dad by the way he rolled up his shirt sleeves when he worked. I explained that my son was going to celebrate his birthday there, that I wanted to give him a surprise, that I didn't want him to worry about the bill. "How many people are coming?" Mr. Thompson asked me. "About 15, I said. "Then let me calculate." He took out his calculator, and after a few minutes he said, "It will be $450, Mr. Miller." $450. It was exactly what I earned in a month working part-time at Mr. Henderson's garage, repairing old cars and selling used parts. But I didn't think twice. I took the brown paper envelope from my pocket where I kept my savings, money I had saved dollar by dollar for 6 months, denying myself even a soda with my lunch to save up. "Here it is," I told Mr. Thompson, handing him the wrinkled $10 and $20 bills. "I want my family to have the best. My son is celebrating his birthday, and I don't want him to worry about a thing." As I sat in that corner chair, I remembered how Mr. Thompson had smiled when I gave him the money. "Your son is very lucky to have a father like you, Mr. Miller," he had said. "Not many fathers would do this," I had replied. "You just want to see your family happy, right?" Now, seeing Ryan speak so coldly, I wondered if Mr. Thompson would still think the same. I wondered if I had been a fool to spend my last savings on a dinner for someone who saw me as a burden. For the next hour, I was completely invisible at that table. Ryan talked about his successes at work, how he had gotten a promotion, his plans to buy a bigger house in Lincoln Park. Jessica added comments about how smart her husband was, how he had achieved everything through his own effort. My in-laws were impressed, asking questions about his job and congratulating him on every achievement. No one spoke to me. No one asked me how I was. It was as if I were a ghost sitting at that table. I ate my steak in silence, chewing slowly as I listened to my son narrate his life as if it were a blockbuster movie. Nobody gave me anything, he said with pride. Everything I have I earned with my own sweat. Every word was like a knife in my chest. I remembered the nights I had worked extra shifts to pay for his private university, the times I had sold my tools to cover his expenses, the loans I had taken out so he wouldn't have to worry about anything. But there he was, erasing me from his story as if I had never existed. When the time came to pay the bill, Ryan took out his gold credit card with a satisfied smile. "This dinner is paid for by a self-made man," he told Jessica as he kissed her on the cheek. Everyone at the table applauded. It was at that moment that Mr. Thompson approached our table with a kind smile. "Excuse the interruption," he said politely, "but the bill was already covered last week." Ryan frowned, confused. "What do you mean it's covered? There must be a mistake." Mr. Thompson looked directly at me and smiled. "There's no mistake, young man. Your father already paid for everything in advance." The silence that followed was like the one before an earthquake. To understand why my soul shattered into pieces that night, you have to know where I come from. My story began in a small town in Texas, where my father, Evan Miller, worked from sunrise to sunset, hammering copper to make pots and pans that he later sold at the market in a bigger town for $30 each. We were 8 siblings, and I was the oldest. So when I turned 12, my father sat me down under the mango tree in the yard of our adobe house and told me with teary eyes, "Edward, son, I need you to leave school. Without your help, your brothers and sisters won't have anything to eat." That same week, I left my books and started learning my father's trade. My child's hands became calloused from the hammer. My fingers were burned 1,000 times by the hot copper, and my dreams of being a teacher faded away. While other kids my age were playing marbles in the town square or chasing chickens, I was in my father's workshop, sweating under the midday sun, learning that life was work and nothing more. But every night when my mother, Hope Miller, thanked me for helping the family, I promised myself that my son would never go through what I was going through. At 18, when I knew how to make anything with copper and had helped my younger siblings continue their studies, my father called me under the mango tree again. This time he told me something that changed my life. "Edward, there's no future for you in this town. You're too smart to stay here hammering copper your whole life. Go to the city, find your way, and when you have children, give them what we couldn't give you." With $50 I had saved selling my own pots and a cardboard suitcase my Uncle Abe lent me, I took the bus to Chicago. The last memory I have of my town is seeing my father waving goodbye as tears streamed down his cheeks. I arrived in the city knowing no one, sleeping at the bus station for the first 2 weeks, washing up in public restrooms at the market, and eating only tortillas with salt because it was all I could afford. In the mornings, I walked the streets looking for work, knocking on doors at mechanic shops, factories, anywhere I thought they might need someone who knew how to work with their hands. After 20 days of being told no jobs, "Come back next week, we have nothing for you," I arrived at the Golden Chassis Garage in a working-class neighborhood, where Mr. Peterson saw my calloused hands and said, "You know how to work, kid. You start tomorrow." I spent the best years of my youth in that garage. Mr. Peterson not only taught me how to repair cars, but he taught me how to read technical manuals, how to treat customers with respect, and most importantly, he taught me that an honest man will always have work. "Edward," he would say while showing me how to change a transmission, "the difference between a good mechanic and a bad one isn't in the tools he has, but in the desire to learn he carries inside." I worked from Monday to Saturday from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, and on Sundays, I studied at the public library, reading books on mechanics and management that were hard for me to understand, but I knew they would be useful someday. At 25, I met Linda Harris, a beautiful girl who worked at the bakery 3 blocks from the shop. Every day, I would stop by to buy bread for lunch, and little by little, we started talking. Linda had a smile that lit up my whole week, and a way of speaking so sweet it made me forget how tired I was from work. We started dating after 6 months of me asking her to walk with me through Lincoln Park every Sunday. We got married 2 years later in a small church, with a simple but loving ceremony, attended only by our families and a few friends from the shop. Our honeymoon was a weekend trip to a lakeside town, riding in a boat a friend of Mr. Peterson's lent us, eating street food, and drinking while mariachis sang to us, because Linda had told them we just got married. I remember that night in the cheap little hotel where we stayed. Linda hugged me and said, "Edward, we're going to have very happy children, because they'll have a father who knows what it means to work with love." I promised her that our children would never experience the hardships I did, that they would have all the opportunities I lacked. When Ryan was born, on the 23rd of September 1989, I cried like I had never cried before in my life. I held in my arms the reason for my existence, my chance to give someone everything I never had. He was a perfect baby, with his mother's big, dark eyes and the long hands he inherited from me. Linda was exhausted from labor but radiant with happiness. "Look at your son, Edward," she said in a tired but loving voice. "This boy is going to have the hardest working dad in the world." That night I stayed awake by his crib, watching him breathe, silently promising him that he would never feel what it's like to be hungry, never have to drop out of school, never have to leave home searching for a better future. From the moment Ryan started walking, I began working double shifts to save money for his education. In the mornings, I worked at Mr. Peterson's garage, and in the afternoons I went to another shop where I repaired private cars. I would get home at 10 at night, my hands black with grease and my body aching with fatigue. But when I saw Ryan running towards me shouting, "Daddy," all the tiredness vanished. Linda would have a hot dinner ready for me, and would tell me everything the boy had done during the day, that he had learned a new word, that he had put together a puzzle, that he loved it when she read him stories before bed. When Ryan turned 5, I enrolled him in the best private kindergarten I could afford, even though it meant I had to work on Sundays too. "My son," I would tell him as I walked him to school, "you are going to study whatever you want. You'll be an educated man, not like your dad who had to leave school." Ryan would hug me and say, "I want to be like you, Daddy. I want to fix cars." But I always replied, "No, son, you're going to be something much better. You're going to work in an office with clean hands and a fancy suit." Linda told me it wasn't bad that the boy wanted to follow in my footsteps, but I was determined that Ryan would have a different future than mine. The first 10 years of Ryan's life were the happiest of my existence. Every day that passed, I watched him grow into a smart, studious boy, full of dreams. He got straight A's, participated in school plays, won math competitions. All the teachers told me my son was special, that he had a bright future ahead of him. I felt like the proudest dad in the world. Linda and I made plans for when Ryan grew up, that he would go to university, have a profession, and give us studious grandchildren. I never imagined that this child who hugged me every night before sleep, who told me, "I love you, Daddy," with such affection, would one day tell me I wasn't welcome at his table. When Ryan turned 15, I knew what my greatest sacrifice would have to be: selling the little house Linda and I had bought in a modest neighborhood. It was a small house, but it was ours, with 2 bedrooms, a patio where Linda grew her mint and basil plants, and a garage where I kept my tools. It had taken us 12 years to pay it off, but when I saw the tuition fees for private high schools, I knew there was no other way. "Linda," I said one night as we were eating quesadillas and refried beans, "we have to sell the house. Ryan needs to study at the American Academy if we want him to get into a good university." Linda was quiet for a moment, looking at the walls we had painted together, and then she said, "Do what you have to do, Edward. For our son, any sacrifice is worth it." We sold the house for $30,000 and moved into a small rented apartment in an industrial area, where the noise of the trucks kept us awake, and where Linda had to climb 4 flights of stairs carrying grocery bags because there was no elevator. But every morning when I saw Ryan leave in his navy blue uniform from the American Academy, carrying his backpack full of English books, I felt like the most successful man in the world. "How was school, son?" I asked him every afternoon when he got home. "Great, Dad," he always answered. "Today we covered organic chemistry and advanced mathematics." I didn't understand half of what he told me, but it filled me with pride to know my son was learning things I couldn't even imagine. During those 3 years of high school, I worked like I had never worked before in my life. Besides Mr. Peterson's garage, I took a weekend job at a shop in a fancier neighborhood where they repaired luxury cars. My hands became experts on BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, Audis, cars that cost more than everything I had earned in my life. The owners of those cars would arrive dressed in suits that cost what I earned in 6 months, talking on phones that looked like computers, complaining because they had to wait 2 hours for me to finish their car. "Hey, mechanic," they'd say, without even looking at me. "Hurry up, I have an important meeting." I would just lower my head and keep working, thinking that one day my son would be like them, successful, respected, important. The day Ryan graduated from high school with honors, I felt that all my effort had been worth it. I was standing in the school auditorium, in my only good suit that I had dry cleaned and pressed especially for the occasion, watching my son walk up to the stage to receive his diploma. Linda was crying with emotion beside me, squeezing my hand. "We did it, Edward," she whispered in my ear. "Our son is going to be someone in life." When Ryan came down from the stage and walked towards us in his cap and gown, I hugged him with all my strength. "I'm so proud of you, my son," I said with a broken voice. "Now, on to university. You're going to be an engineer, just like you always wanted." Ryan hugged me back and said, "Thanks for everything, Dad. Without you, none of this would have been possible." To pay for university, I had to make the most painful sacrifice of my life, selling the tools my father had passed down to me. Those copper tools he had made with his own hands back in our small town. They were hammers, chisels, files, all hand-forged by my dad over years of work. When I took them to the pawn shop, Mr. Sylvester, the owner, grabbed them and weighed them as if they were scrap metal. "I'll give you $800 for the lot," he said without even looking me in the eye. $800 for my father's life's work. But I needed that money for Ryan's enrollment at Northwestern University. That night, I called my dad. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, "I had to sell your tools." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my dad said, "It's okay, son. That's what tools are for, to be useful. If they helped your son go to school, then they served their purpose." During the 5 years Ryan studied business administration, I continued to work day and night to pay his tuition, his books, his school expenses. Linda had to start working too, selling homemade food at a local market to help with the bills. Ryan was at a university where all his classmates drove new cars, wore designer clothes, and talked about their trips to Europe as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I noticed that my son was sometimes embarrassed when I picked him up in my beat-up '95 sedan, my hands still dirty with grease because I came straight from the shop. "Dad," he said to me once, "let's just meet at the train station. It's just my friends." He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood perfectly. He didn't want his rich friends to see his mechanic dad. On the day of his university graduation, Ryan looked so handsome in his cap and gown. He had landed a job at a multinational corporation before even graduating, something that, according to him, was very hard to achieve. "Dad," he told me that night during the celebration dinner at a restaurant downtown, "you won't have to work so hard anymore. I'm going to make good money, and I'll help you." Linda and I hugged each other, thrilled. We thought we could finally rest a little, that we could enjoy the fruits of so much sacrifice. "We're so proud of you, son," I told him. Everything we did was worth it. Ryan smiled and hugged me. "You're the best dad in the world," he said. "I'll never forget everything you did for me." Those were the last kind words my son ever said to me. 3 months after graduating, Ryan met Jessica Campbell at a company party. Jessica came from a wealthy family. Her father owned several clothing boutiques on the Gold Coast, and her mother was an interior decorator for the rich. From the first time Ryan introduced her to me, I could tell she looked at me like I was something dirty. "Nice to meet you, sir," she said when I extended my hand to greet her, but you could tell she didn't want to touch me. She was dressed in clothes that looked incredibly expensive, wore a sweet perfume that made me dizzy, and spoke with an accent that sounded like it was from TV. "And what do you do?" she asked. "I'm a mechanic," I answered with pride. Jessica smiled, but it was a fake smile, the kind people give when you tell them something they don't like but have to pretend they do. From the moment Ryan started dating Jessica, everything in our relationship changed. He no longer came to visit us every Sunday like before. He no longer told me how work was going. He no longer asked for my advice on anything. When I called him on the phone, he was always in a hurry, always had something important to do. "Dad, I'll talk to you later, I'm busy," he'd say. "Dad, I can't make it on Sunday. Jessica and I have plans." Linda noticed something was happening. "Edward," she'd say to me at night, "our son is changing, he's not the same." I tried to defend him. "It's normal, dear. He's in love, he's starting his life. You'll see, everything will go back to normal." But deep in my heart, I knew Jessica was filling his head with ideas that were pushing us further and further away. The first hurtful comment I heard from Jessica was at their engagement party, held at her parents' house. It was a huge house in Lincoln Park, with a garden, a swimming pool, and uniformed waiters serving appetizers I didn't even know how to eat. Linda and I arrived in our fanciest clothes, but we felt like fish out of water. Jessica was introducing Ryan to all her friends. "This is my fiancé," she'd say. "He graduated with honors from Northwestern and is already a supervisor at a multinational company. He paid for his entire degree all by himself. He's a self-made man." I was standing a few feet away, hearing everything. Ryan didn't correct her. He didn't say that I had paid for his university. He didn't say I had sold my house and my father's tools so he could study. He stayed silent, letting Jessica tell that lie. That night, when Linda and I returned to our small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. "What did I do wrong, Linda?" I asked my wife. "Why is my son ashamed of me?" Linda hugged me and said, "You didn't do anything wrong, Edward. You raised an ungrateful son, that's all." But I knew it was more complicated than that. I had wanted so badly to give Ryan a better life that, without realizing it, I had taught him that where he came from was worthless. I had taught him that being a mechanic was something to be ashamed of. I had taught him that having money was more important than having dignity, and now I was paying the consequences of my own mistakes. The first public humiliation I experienced with my son was at his and Jessica's wedding, held at a fancy estate, a place so elegant I had only seen it in magazines. Linda and I arrived early, as we always do, dressed in our best clothes. I wore a navy blue suit I had bought especially for the occasion, and Linda wore a pink dress she had a local seamstress make. When we entered the garden, where the ceremony was to take place, we realized we were the only ones who seemed out of place. All of Jessica's guests arrived in new cars, the men in expensive-looking suits, and the women in dresses that sparkled as if they had real diamonds. We felt like two country folk lost in a city of the rich. During the ceremony, I couldn't help but cry when I saw my son standing at the altar, so handsome in his black tuxedo, waiting for his bride. I remembered the little boy I walked to his first day of school, the young man who hugged me when he had nightmares, the boy who used to say, "I want to be like you, Dad," when he saw me working in the shop. Jessica arrived dressed like a princess, in a white gown, with a train so long it took 3 girls to carry it. When the priest asked, "Who gives this woman?" Jessica's father, Mr. Campbell, stood up proudly and walked to the altar. But when it was time for the priest to ask about Ryan, my son simply said, "I give myself." He didn't even look at me. I was there, in the 3rd row, waiting for him to mention me, to say, "My father gives me away," but it never happened. At the reception, things got worse. The planners had set up a special table for the parents of the bride and groom, but when Linda and I went to sit down, we saw there were only 4 chairs, for Mr. and Mrs. Campbell, and for 2 other people we didn't know. "Excuse me," I said to the planner, a young man in a black suit who spoke with a polished accent. "Where do we sit?" The young man checked his list and told me, "You are at table 8, over there in the back." The table where you could barely hear the music, and where the guests, who were obviously not important to Jessica's family, were seated. We ended up next to a distant aunt of Jessica's, who complained all night about the food, and some cousins who arrived drunk and talked about football the whole time. The worst part of that night was when the speeches began. Mr. Campbell stood up with a glass of champagne in his hand and started talking about how proud he was of his daughter, how Ryan was the perfect son-in-law, how he had seen from the beginning that my son was a young man with a future who had made it on his own. "This young man, Mr. Campbell said, pointing at Ryan, "is an example that in America, if you want to get ahead, you can do it with hard work and dedication, without anyone's help, just with your will to succeed." The whole room applauded. Ryan smiled proudly. Jessica kissed him on the cheek, and I was sitting at my corner table, feeling as if I had just been erased from my own son's history. When Mr. Campbell's speech ended, I waited for my son to say something, to mention me even in passing, to say thanks to my parents for all their support. But Ryan just stood up, thanked the guests for coming, and sat down. Not a single word about me, about Linda, about everything we had done for him. Linda grabbed my hand under the table. "Let's go, Edward," she whispered. "There's nothing for us here anymore." But I didn't want to leave. It was my only son's wedding, and even though it hurt, I wanted to be there until the end. I wanted to see their first dance as a married couple. I wanted to be present at that important moment in his life, even if he had decided I wasn't important to him. If you're listening to my story, please tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes, knowing there are people in the world who hear me gives me the strength to keep telling these things that hurt so much to remember. After the wedding, Ryan and Jessica went on a 3-week honeymoon to Europe. When they came back, they didn't call to tell us how it went. I found out about their trip from the pictures Jessica posted on Facebook, where I saw them having dinner at elegant restaurants in Paris, visiting museums in Rome, drinking wine on the beaches of Greece. In all the photos they looked happy, in love, living a life I had only seen in movies. A week after they returned, I couldn't take it anymore and called them. "How was your trip, son?" I asked Ryan. "Great, Dad," he answered in a cold voice I didn't recognize. "But I'm very busy. We just got back and I have a lot of work to catch up on." The call lasted less than 5 minutes. He didn't ask how I was, how Linda was. He didn't invite us to visit. He didn't tell us anything about his trip. 3 months after the wedding, Linda and I found out that Ryan and Jessica had moved into an apartment on the Gold Coast, in one of those modern buildings with a doorman and a gym. They didn't tell us anything. We found out because Jessica's mother posted pictures of the new place on Facebook, showing off the Italian furniture and the view from the 15th floor. "Edward," Linda said to me that night, "our son wants nothing to do with us anymore." I tried to defend him again. "He's just starting his marriage, dear. He needs his space." But the truth is, I was also realizing that something had changed forever. The son I had raised, the one who called me his hero, no longer existed. In his place was a man who was ashamed of his origins. The first Father's Day after his wedding, I waited all morning for Ryan to call or come visit. Linda had prepared his favorite dish from childhood, thinking maybe he would come for lunch like he used to. But the phone never rang. At 6 in the evening, I couldn't wait any longer and called his cell. "Happy Father's Day, son," I said when he answered. "Oh, right, Happy Father's Day, Dad," he replied as if it were an annoying obligation. "Aren't you guys coming for lunch?" I asked. "No, Dad, Jessica and I have plans. We're going to have lunch with her parents." That night, Linda and I ate alone, in silence, feeling how our table had become too big for just 2 people. The first Christmas after his wedding was the saddest of my life. Ryan called us on December 23rd to say they wouldn't be spending Christmas Eve with us. "We already promised to go to Jessica's family," he said. Linda had bought a turkey, made cookies, and decorated our small apartment with the same Christmas ornaments we had used since Ryan was a child. Everything was ready for a family dinner that never happened. On the night of the 24th, Linda and I had dinner alone, looking at Facebook pictures of the Christmas dinner at the Campbell's house, where Ryan appeared smiling next to his father-in-law, as if Mr. Campbell were his real dad. That night I cried myself to sleep, wondering at what point I had lost my son. But the biggest humiliation came last year, when my grandson Sam was born. Linda and I found out about the birth on Facebook in a post Jessica made with a picture of the baby and a caption that read, "Welcome to the world, Sam Miller Campbell. You already have your grandparents Armando and Esperanza waiting for you with all their love." It didn't mention that the baby also had other grandparents. It didn't mention that Linda and I existed. When I finally got to speak with Ryan, 3 days after the birth, I asked him, "Why didn't you let us know the baby was born?" His answer hurt me more than any physical blow I had ever received. "We were just really busy with the paperwork, Dad. You know how these things are. A lie." What was really happening was that Jessica didn't want us to be the first to meet her son. When we were finally able to meet Sam, 2 weeks after he was born, Jessica received us in her apartment as if we were annoying visitors. "You can only stay for an hour," she said, "because the baby needs to rest." During that hour, she didn't let us hold the baby, didn't offer us a glass of water, and stood next to us as if we were going to steal something. Ryan wasn't even home. "He's at work," Jessica told us. As we were leaving, Linda said to me in the elevator, "Edward, that woman hates us." And for the first time, I had to accept that my daughter-in-law had turned my son into a stranger. That night, I realized that if I wanted to have any relationship with my grandson, I would have to start doing things in secret, without Ryan knowing, and so my secret life as an invisible grandfather began. After that first cold visit to Jessica's apartment, I made a decision that changed my life. If my son no longer wanted me as part of his family, then I would be Sam's ghost grandfather. I started researching which school they were going to enroll him in, how much the tuition was, what the child needed that his parents might not be able to provide. I became a detective of my own family. I followed Jessica's Facebook posts to know where they took the boy, what things he liked, when he had doctor's appointments. Linda would tell me, "Edward, this isn't right. You shouldn't have to spy on your own grandson." But I felt it was the only way to remain a part of his life, even if from the shadows. When Sam turned 3, I found out through Facebook that they were going to enroll him in Little Geniuses Preschool, a private school in Lincoln Park that cost $800 a month. I knew Ryan made good money at his job, but I also knew that with the expenses of the expensive apartment, the new car they had bought, and the lifestyle they led, an extra $800 a month could be a problem. So, I went to the school one afternoon. I spoke with the principal and told her I wanted to pay for 6 months of my grandson's tuition in advance. "Are you the grandfather?" the woman asked me. "Yes," I replied, "but it's a surprise. The parents can't know that I paid." The principal smiled and said, "What a beautiful gesture, Mr. Miller. The boy is very lucky to have a grandfather like you." For 3 years, I secretly paid for Sam's schooling. Every month, I would religiously go to Little Geniuses and give the principal the tuition money. To get that $800 a month, I had to work 7 days a week, Monday to Friday at Mr. Peterson's shop, and on weekends repairing cars on the street under the sun or rain, with my tools spread out on the pavement. My hands became rougher, my back got tired faster, but every time I saw pictures of Sam on Facebook, learning English or playing during recess at his nice school, I knew all the effort was worth it. The problem was that Ryan never wondered how he could afford such an expensive school. At the Campbell family gatherings, which I saw through Jessica's photos, I heard my son boast that he alone was paying for his son's best education. "It's a sacrifice," he would say in the Facebook comments when someone asked about the school, but Jessica and I believe that education is the most important thing. We tighten our belts to give Sam the best. I would read those comments on my old phone, sitting in my apartment, and wonder how my son could live so peacefully with that lie. Did he really believe he was paying for everything himself? Or did he know the truth and just find it convenient to pretend he didn't? The situation became more complicated when Sam started getting sick often. He was a child who caught colds frequently, had ear infections, and needed frequent visits to the pediatrician and expensive medicines. Jessica would post complaints on Facebook about how expensive it was to keep a child healthy, about how their health insurance didn't cover everything, about how they had to pay for private consultations because the public health system had months-long waits for appointments. I would read those posts, and it pained me to know my grandson was sick and I couldn't even call to ask how he was. So I decided to do something about it. I found the doctor who treated Sam, the pediatrician, and I went to his office. "Doctor," I said, "I'm Sam Miller's grandfather. I want to pay in advance for all the consultations and medicines the boy will need this year." The doctor looked at me strangely. "Do they need it?" I replied. "And they can't know. It's complicated." The doctor looked at me with a mix of confusion and tenderness. "Sir, in 30 years of being a pediatrician, I've never had something like this happen. Are you sure you want to do this?" I took out the $1,500 I had saved from selling my old television and some furniture we no longer used from my pocket. "I'm sure, doctor. My grandson can't be sick for lack of money." For that entire year, Sam received the best medical care without Ryan and Jessica paying a single dollar. Every time the boy got sick, Jessica took him to the doctor, and the doctor would tell her that everything was covered. It must be the insurance, Jessica thought, and never investigated further. On Facebook, Jessica continued to complain about how expensive it was to have children, but she no longer mentioned medical expenses. I would see her post pictures of Sam at the doctor's office, always smiling after his appointments, and I felt good knowing that my money was helping my grandson stay healthy. But I also felt sad that I had to be a secret grandfather, unable to hug my grandson when he was sick, unable to be there when he needed me. The most painful thing was that Sam, without knowing it, sometimes mentioned things that gave me clues that he knew someone else was helping. One time, Linda and I were at a shopping mall, and by chance, we ran into Jessica with Sam. The boy, who was already 5, ran towards me shouting, "Grandpa Edward!" Jessica became very uncomfortable, but she couldn't stop the boy from hugging me. "Grandpa," Sam said to me, with that innocence of children, "my teacher says I have a guardian angel who pays for my school. Do you know who it is?" Jessica turned red with embarrassment and told Sam, "Don't be silly, sweetie. Your daddy pays for your school." But Sam kept looking at me with those big, intelligent eyes as if he knew I had something to do with his guardian angel. Last year, when Sam turned 6, Ryan and Jessica threw a big party at a venue in a wealthy neighborhood. I saw the pictures on Facebook. Clowns, magicians, a table full of expensive gifts, and all the kids from Sam's school running around a huge garden. Linda and I were not invited. We didn't even know it was his birthday until we saw the pictures the next day. "Edward," Linda said to me that night, "we can't go on like this. It's too much pain." But I didn't know how to stop. I had been the invisible grandfather for so long that I no longer knew how to be a normal one. I no longer knew how to approach my son without him rejecting me, how to be part of my grandson's life without causing problems. What hurt me the most was realizing that Ryan truly believed he had achieved everything on his own. In the work meetings he had, according to what Jessica posted on Facebook, my son always talked about how he had come from nothing, how he had managed to give his family a high standard of living without anyone's help. "My husband is an example of overcoming adversity," Jessica wrote in her posts. "He made himself from the ground up, and now he can give our son everything he didn't have." Every time I read those words, I wondered if Ryan had really forgotten everything I had done for him, or if he had simply decided to erase it from his memory, because the version where he was the sole hero of his story was more convenient. The hardest moment came last year, on a special day for kids. I had seen on Facebook that Jessica and Ryan were going to take Sam to Six Flags, and I decided to go too, just to see him from afar, to watch my grandson have fun, even from a distance. I wore my baseball cap, so they wouldn't recognize me, and sat on a bench near the rides. I watched Sam ride the roller coaster, laugh with the clowns, eat cotton candy with his parents. He looked so happy, so loved, so protected. But when I saw them walking towards where I was, I quickly got up and hid behind a hot dog stand. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want Jessica to get upset. I didn't want Ryan to yell at me in front of Sam. At that moment, I realized that I had become a stranger in my own family's life. I was a grandfather who had to hide to watch his grandson play. That night, I came home and cried for hours, wondering how I had reached such a painful point in my life. The moment I discovered the extent to which my son had decided to erase me from his story was 6 months ago, during a rainy afternoon I will never forget. I was at Mr. Peterson's garage repairing a Jetta's transmission when Mike Davis, a young man who had worked with me years ago and now had his own parts business, came in. "Hey, Mr. Edward," he said as he shook off the rain. "Didn't you tell me your son works at Monterey Corporate?" "Yes," I replied. "He's a regional manager." Mike smiled and said something that changed my life. "Well, I was in a meeting with him yesterday. He told me his whole life story, how he made it on his own. He's very proud of being self-made." I stopped working and stared at him. "What do you mean, self-made?" Mike realized he had said something wrong. "Oh, you know how executives are, always bragging about their achievements." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake thinking about what Mike had said, trying to convince myself that maybe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe Ryan had mentioned his family, but Mike hadn't noticed. But something told me I had to investigate further. The next day, I went to an internet cafe near the garage and Googled my son's name. What I found destroyed my soul. There was an interview he had given to his company's magazine titled From the Neighborhood to the Office, the success story of Ryan Miller. In that interview, my son told how he had grown up in a humble family, how he had worked since he was young to pay for his studies, how he had managed to get ahead without anyone's help, just with hard work and dedication. I read that entire interview 3 times, hoping to find even a small mention of me, of Linda, of everything we had done for him, but there was nothing. In the interview, Ryan said, "My parents always believed in me, but from a young age, I knew I had to fend for myself. I worked as a private tutor to pay for my university. I sold products from a catalog. I did everything not to be a burden on my family." Lies. All lies. He had never worked during university, never sold anything from a catalog, never tutored anyone. He had dedicated all his time to studying because I was killing myself working so he wouldn't have to worry about money. And there he was, inventing a story of personal struggle that had never existed. The worst part of that interview was a photo where Ryan appeared in his office, dressed in an expensive suit, smiling with that successful, self-made man's smile. The caption read, "Ryan Miller, an example that in America, it's possible to get ahead with your own effort." I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to find in that face something of the boy I had raised, of the son who used to tell me, "I love you, Dad," every night before bed. But the man in the photo was a stranger. He was someone who had decided his story was better without me in it, that his success was more impressive if it seemed he had achieved it alone. That same week, I decided to look for more information online. I found Ryan's LinkedIn profile, where he also told his professional story. It said, "A professional graduate of Northwestern University, where I studied thanks to an academic excellence scholarship and part-time jobs that allowed me to afford my studies." Another lie. Ryan had never had any scholarship. I had paid every dollar of his tuition by selling my house, my tools, working double shifts for 5 years. But in his official version, I didn't exist. In his official version, he was a poor but talented young man who had managed to study at a private university thanks to his own effort. It was a much more inspiring story than the real one, where a mechanic father had sacrificed everything to give his son a chance. What hurt the most was finding a YouTube video where Ryan had given a talk at his company about leadership and personal growth. In that 40-minute video, my son talked about his life philosophy, how he had learned that no one will give you anything in life, how he had developed his winner's mindset, working since he was young to get everything he had. For 40 full minutes, Ryan talked about his success, his achievements, his plans for the future, without once mentioning his family, without mentioning that he had parents who had supported him, without mentioning that someone had made sacrifices so he could be standing there, giving advice on success. In his story, he was the only protagonist. After watching that video, I called my sister Lucy, who lives in another state, and told her everything I had discovered. "Lucy," I said with a broken voice, "my son is saying he's self-made. He's denying that we exist." My sister was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that broke my heart. "Edward, maybe it's true that he is self-made. Maybe everything you did doesn't count, because he never asked for it." Her words hurt me, but they also made me think. Was it possible that Ryan really believed he was self-made? Was it possible that he had erased all my sacrifices from his memory? Or had he simply decided it was more convenient to pretend they hadn't existed? A week after that call with my sister, I decided to do something I had never done before: investigate how Ryan spent his money. If he really was self-made, if he was really paying for everything with his own salary, then he had to be very tight on money. But when I checked his social media, I saw that he and Jessica were still living like rich people. Dinners at expensive restaurants, beach vacations, designer clothes, new cars. How could he afford all that if he was also paying for Sam's school, the rent for the apartment, and all the expenses of an upper-class family? The answer was obvious. He wasn't paying for everything. I was still secretly paying for Sam's school, still paying for his medical consultations. And there were probably other things he wasn't paying for, but he also didn't know where the money was coming from. That's when I realized something terrible. Ryan had not only decided to erase me from his public story, but he had also decided to erase me from his private one. He had lived for so many years receiving financial help from me without acknowledging it that he didn't even realize that help existed anymore. For him, the money I put in for Sam's school, for his medicines, for other things, just appeared as if by magic. He had become so used to receiving without being grateful that he no longer even wondered where the extra resources came from. He had normalized the fact that his life was easier than it should be on his salary, without ever asking why. The most painful realization was that Jessica knew perfectly well what was happening. She was the one who managed the household finances, the one who paid the bills, the one who noticed when something cost less than expected, or when there was extra money they couldn't explain. But Jessica had decided to keep quiet, probably because it suited her for her husband to seem more successful than he really was. It suited her for Ryan to be seen as a man who could support his family at a high level, without anyone's help. It suited her for her friends to think she had married a self-made man, not the son of a mechanic who still depended on his father's help. That night, after discovering the whole truth, I sat at my small kitchen table and wrote a letter I never sent. In that letter, I told Ryan everything I had discovered, everything that hurt me, everything I had done for him without him knowing. I called him out for erasing my story, for turning my sacrifices into lies, for deciding it was better to pretend he was self-made. I wrote 10 pages by hand, crying as I wrote each word. But when I finished, I tore the letter into small pieces and threw it in the trash. I realized there was no point in confronting someone who had decided I didn't exist. I realized I had to find another way to reclaim my dignity, another way to make my son understand what he had lost by erasing me from his life. And that's when I started planning the moment that arrived that night at the Royal Steakhouse. 2 months ago, I received a call that filled me with hope for the first time in years. It was Ryan, and from the way he spoke, he sounded like the loving son he had been before marrying Jessica. "Dad," he said in a soft voice I hadn't heard in a long time, "how have you been?" It's been a while since we talked. My heart started to pound. Linda was washing dishes in the kitchen and motioned to me, asking who it was. When I told her it was Ryan, she dropped everything and came closer to listen. "I'm fine, son," I replied, trying to hide the emotion in my voice. "Just working, as always." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, as if Ryan was thinking about what to say. Then he surprised me with something I never expected. "Dad, I want to invite you to dinner for my birthday. A lot has happened, and I think it's time we talked." When I hung up the phone, Linda and I hugged as if we had just received the best news in the world. "Did you hear that, dear?" I said with tears in my eyes. "Our son wants to talk. He wants to fix things." Linda was crying with happiness, too. "I knew this would happen, Edward. A son can never go that long without missing his parents. Ryan realized he needs us." That night, we couldn't sleep from the excitement. We made plans for everything we were going to say, how we were going to mend our relationship, how we could finally be normal grandparents to Sam. For the first time in years, I felt like life was giving me a second chance at happiness. The next few days were the happiest I'd had in a long time. I bought a new shirt, a sky blue one that Linda said made me look very handsome. I took my only dress shoes to the cobbler to have them fixed and made like new. Linda cut my hair in our kitchen, as she had done for 30 years of marriage. "You look so elegant, Edward," she said as she adjusted my shirt collar. "Ryan will be so proud to have such a handsome dad." I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and felt young again, like when I was dating Linda and would get ready to take her to the movies on Sundays. Ryan had told me the dinner would be at the Royal Steakhouse, one of those fancy places I had never been to. "It's a special place, Dad," he had said on the phone. "I want to celebrate my birthday in a big way, and I want you to be there." When he said that, I felt that my son had finally realized I was important in his life, that his birthdays weren't complete without his dad. A week before the dinner, I went to the restaurant to check it out, to know how to dress, so I wouldn't make a fool of myself in front of Jessica's family. When I arrived, I was impressed. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, waiters in elegant uniforms, and decor that looked like it was from a movie. That's when I spoke with Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager, a man my age who reminded me of my father in the respectful and kind way he spoke. "My son is celebrating his birthday here," I told him. "About 15 family members are coming. I want to pay for everything in advance, as a surprise." "Mr. Thompson smiled and asked, "Is this a reconciliation?" I don't know why, but I told Mr. Thompson my whole story. I told him that my son and I had been distant for years, that this dinner was my chance to fix things, that I wanted to show him I was still his dad, and that I was proud of him. Mr. Thompson listened patiently and at the end said, "Mr. Miller, you are a good father. Your son is very lucky." That afternoon, I withdrew the $450 the dinner cost from my savings account and gave it to him. During the week leading up to the dinner, I was so excited I couldn't concentrate on work. Mr. Peterson noticed my mood and asked me what was wrong. "I'm having dinner with my son, Mr. Peterson," I'd tell him. "We're going to work out our problems." Mr. Peterson, who had known me for so many years, patted me on the back and said, "I'm very happy for you, Edward. A man needs to have a good relationship with his children." I even bought a special gift for Ryan, an Italian leather wallet I had seen in a store downtown. It cost me $150. Money I had saved for 3 months selling used parts. But I wanted to give him something nice, something that would show him I thought of him, that his birthday mattered to me. The night of the dinner, Linda helped me get dressed as if we were going to a wedding. She put on my new shirt, tied my tie that had belonged to my father, shined my shoes one more time, and put a little bit of cologne on me that we had bought especially for the occasion. "You look very elegant, my love," she said as she saw me in the full-length mirror we had in the bedroom. "Ryan will be very proud to have a dad like you." Before leaving, Linda hugged me tightly and said, "Edward, tonight will be the start of something new for our family. You'll see, everything will be fine." I gave her a kiss on the forehead and promised to tell her everything when I got back. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, as I always do when an appointment is important to me. The waiter took me to the table Mr. Thompson had reserved for us, a large, elegant table by a window overlooking the restaurant's garden. I sat there, with my gift wrapped in gold paper on my lap, watching the other guests arrive. Jessica, in a red dress that looked very expensive. Jessica's parents dressed as if they were going to a gala. Ryan's brothers-in-law in suits that shone under the restaurant lights. Everyone looked elegant, successful, like people who belonged in that place. When I saw Sam, my 8-year-old grandson, arrive dressed in a small suit with his hair combed like an adult, my eyes filled with tears of emotion. Ryan arrived exactly at 8, wearing a gray suit that looked more expensive than my entire wardrobe. He looked handsome, successful, like the important man I had always dreamed he would be. When he saw me sitting at the table, he smiled and walked towards me. For a moment, I thought he was going to hug me, that he was going to greet me with the affection he used to show when he was young. My heart was beating so fast I thought everyone could hear it. I stood up from my chair with the gift in my hands, preparing for the reconciliation hug I had been waiting for years. "Happy birthday, son," I shouted with all the joy I had been holding in. But when I reached him, Ryan didn't hug me. He just looked me up and down, as if evaluating whether I deserved to be there. "You can sit down," he told me in a cold voice that felt like ice water. It wasn't the tone of someone who was happy to see me. It wasn't the tone of a son who had missed his father. It was the tone of someone doing an annoying favor. He pointed with his finger to an empty chair at the other end of the table, as far as possible from where he was going to sit. And then he said the words that destroyed my soul. "But don't fool yourself, Dad. You are not welcome here." At that moment, I realized that all my hope had been an illusion. I realized that Ryan hadn't invited me to reconcile. He had invited me to humiliate me in front of his entire political family, to show them that he had control over me, that he could treat me however he wanted, and I would take it. As I walked to that corner chair, with my legs trembling and my heart broken into 1,000 pieces, I understood the most painful truth of my life. My son had set a trap for me. He had perfectly calculated how to inflict the maximum possible damage. He knew I would arrive full of hope, dressed in my best clothes, expecting a reconciliation. He knew I would bring a gift, that I would be excited, that I would have hope. And he had decided to destroy all of that in front of witnesses, in front of Jessica's family, to look good with them, to show them that he had nothing to do with the poor mechanic who had raised him. That night, I discovered that my son had not only erased me from his story, he also hated me enough to want to see me suffer. And the worst part was that I had paid for my own humiliation. When I sat in that corner chair, feeling all the eyes at the table judging me, something broke inside me. It wasn't just sadness I felt. It was a rage that had been building for years, a dignity that had been trampled on for too long. I saw Ryan laughing with Jessica. I saw my brothers-in-law making jokes about something. I saw Sam playing on his tablet without understanding why his grandfather was so far away, and I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't continue being the invisible father, the ghost grandfather, the man who paid for everything from the shadows while others took the credit. When Mr. Thompson approached to tell us the bill was already paid, when I saw the confused look on Ryan's face, I knew my moment had come. "Yes, son," I said to Ryan, raising my voice so the whole table could hear me. "I paid for this dinner. I paid for it a week ago, when I still believed you wanted me here." The silence that followed was like the silence before an earthquake. Jessica stopped chewing her food. The brothers-in-law stopped talking. Sam looked up from his tablet and looked at me with those big, intelligent eyes. Ryan turned pale, as if he had just seen a ghost. "What are you saying, Dad?" he asked me in a voice that tried to sound annoyed, but I knew was nervous. "I'm telling the truth, Ryan," I replied. "The truth you've been hiding for years." I stood up from my chair and walked to where he was sitting. I took the brown paper envelope from my pocket where I kept all the receipts I had been collecting for months. "You want to know who paid for this dinner?" I said as I placed the first paper on the table. "Your dad. You want to know who paid for Sam's school for 3 years?" I put another paper on the table. "Your dad. You want to know who paid for all of your son's medical appointments?" Another paper. With each receipt I placed, Ryan's face turned redder. Jessica looked at the papers, as if they were bombs that could explode at any moment. The brothers-in-law had stopped eating, and were watching us, as if we were in a play. "You're crazy, Dad," Ryan said, trying to sound self-assured, but his voice trembled. "I pay for all my family's things. I work to support my wife and son." Then I took out the most painful receipt of all, the one from the sale of my house. "What did you pay for your university with, Ryan?" I asked, showing him the paper. "What did you pay for your 5 years at Northwestern with?" Ryan tried to take the paper from me, but I pulled it away. "Your dad sold his house, son. Your dad sold the tools his father had left him. Your dad worked day and night for 5 years so you could study without worrying about a thing." My voice broke as I said those last words, but I kept talking. Jessica was completely silent, but I could see in her eyes that she knew everything I was saying was true. She was the one who managed the household finances. She was the one who had noticed that things were costing less than expected, that there was extra money appearing without explanation. "Jessica," I said, looking at her directly, "you knew someone was helping. You knew Sam had a guardian angel who paid for his school. You knew, didn't you?" Jessica looked down and didn't answer. Her silence was more eloquent than any confession. Jessica's parents looked uncomfortable, as if they were witnessing something very intimate they shouldn't be seeing. "I never asked you for any of that," Ryan yelled, standing up. "I never asked you to sell your house. I never asked you to pay for Sam's school. If you did it, it was because you wanted to." His words hurt me more than any physical blow I had ever received. "You're right, son," I replied with a calmness that surprised even me. "You never asked me for anything, because a son doesn't have to ask his father to love him, because a son doesn't have to ask his father to sacrifice for him, because that's what fathers do. Give everything without expecting anything in return. But I did expect something, Ryan. I expected you not to erase me from your story." I took out my old phone and searched for the interview I had found online, the one where Ryan told how he had made it on his own. "Do you want me to read to everyone what you said in this interview?" I asked. Do you want them to know how you said you paid for your university by working part-time? Ryan tried to take the phone from me, but I continued reading aloud. From a young age, I knew I had to fend for myself. I worked as a private tutor to pay for my university. I looked up and looked at the whole table. A lie. Ryan never worked during university. I paid every dollar of his studies. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Sam had put down his tablet and was looking at us with a confusion that broke my heart. "Enough, Dad," Ryan said, his voice no longer angry but pleading. "That's enough. Don't do this here." But I couldn't stop. I had been silent for too many years. I had held in too much pain. Do what, Ryan? Not tell the truth? Not defend my dignity? Not defend myself from the lies you've been telling about me? I took more papers from the envelope. Here are the receipts for everything I've secretly paid for years. Here is the proof that the successful man you see sitting there, I said, pointing at him, did not make himself. He was made with the sacrifice of a father who sold everything he had to give him a chance to be someone in life. Jessica finally spoke, but not to defend her husband. "Ryan," she said in a very soft voice, "is everything your dad is saying true?" Ryan remained silent, looking at the papers I had scattered on the table, as if they were evidence in a trial. "Answer your wife, son," I said. "Tell her if it's true that I paid for her university. Tell her if it's true that I'm still paying for Sam's school. Tell her if it's true that the success you brag so much about was built on the sacrifices of a mechanic who broke his back for you." Ryan looked up and looked at me with a mixture of hatred and shame I had never seen in his eyes. "Yes," he finally said, "it's true." When Ryan confessed the truth, something changed in the atmosphere of the whole table. Jessica's parents looked at each other as if they had just discovered their son-in-law was not who they thought he was. The brothers-in-law stopped looking at us as if we were a spectacle, and started seeing us as a broken family. Sam came over to me and took my hand. "Grandpa," he said with that soul-crushing innocence, "why is Daddy lying?" That question from my grandson was the last straw. I knelt down to his level and told him, "Sometimes, sweetie, people forget where they come from. They forget who helped them. But you never forget your grandpa who loves you very much." Sam hugged me tightly, and in that hug, I felt that at least someone at that table still considered me part of the family. I stood up and looked at Ryan one last time. "You've told the truth, son. Now tell me one thing. Did you invite me to this dinner to humiliate me? Was it your plan to make me feel unwelcome in your life after everything I did for you?" Ryan didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Jessica was crying silently. Jessica's parents looked at their son-in-law as if he were a stranger. The elegant restaurant's atmosphere had become heavy, uncomfortable, filled with a truth that had been hidden for too long. "Well, you know what, Ryan?" I said, collecting my receipts from the table. "You're right about one thing. From now on, you won't have to worry about your dad helping you anymore. Because your dad is going to leave your life, just like you wanted. But you'll leave knowing who paid for this dinner. You'll leave knowing who the real man of this family was." Just as I was gathering my papers to leave the restaurant, feeling like I had said everything I needed to say but with a shattered heart, Sam did something that changed everything. My 8-year-old grandson let go of Jessica's hand and walked towards me with the determined steps children have when something really bothers them. "Daddy," he said to Ryan, in a more serious voice than a child his age should have. "Why did you say those mean things to my grandpa?" The whole table fell silent. Sam continued, "My teacher says lying is wrong. Why did you lie about my grandpa?" Ryan tried to quiet him. "Sam, go sit down. The adults are talking." But Sam didn't move. "No," my grandson said with a firmness that filled me with pride. "My grandpa is sad, and it's your fault." At that moment, Mr. Thompson, the restaurant manager, approached our table. He had been watching the whole argument from a distance and looked concerned about the scene we were making. But instead of asking us to leave, he did something I never expected. "Excuse me for interrupting," Mr. Thompson said, addressing the whole table, "but I have to say something. Mr. Miller," he said, looking at me directly, "you came here a week ago, very excited, telling me you were going to reconcile with your son. You told me your whole story, how proud you were of him, how much you had worked to give him a good education. You paid for this dinner with wrinkled bills that you could tell had been saved for a long time. And you told me, 'I want my family to have the best, Mr. Thompson. My son is celebrating his birthday, and I don't want him to worry about a thing.'" Mr. Thompson continued speaking, and with every word he said, I saw Jessica's face turn redder with shame. "In 30 years of working in restaurants, Mr. Thompson continued, I've seen many families, many celebrations, many reconciliations. But I have rarely seen a father as proud of his son as you, Mr. Miller. When you told me your son was a manager, that he had studied at a private university, that he had a beautiful family, your eyes shone as if you were talking about the president. Ryan's brothers-in-law looked down. Jessica's parents looked uncomfortable. Ryan was completely silent, as if Mr. Thompson's words had left him speechless. But what impacted me the most was when Mr. Thompson addressed Ryan directly. "Young man," he said with the respect due to a customer, but with the firmness of a father scolding his son. "Your father told me you were an example of overcoming adversity, that you had gotten ahead thanks to the education he had given you. He didn't talk about a son who was self-made. He talked about a son who had taken advantage of all the opportunities a hard-working father had given him." The silence at the table was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. "Your father is very proud of you, Mr. Thompson continued. "The question is, are you proud of your father?" Ryan finally spoke, but his voice was completely different from the cold one he had used with me all night. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "you don't understand. Things are more complicated than they seem." But Mr. Thompson was not intimidated. "No, young man. Things are very simple. Your father loves you. He sacrificed for you, and you are treating him like he's a burden. That's not complicated. That's ingratitude." Mr. Thompson's words hit Ryan like blows. Jessica stood up and approached Mr. Thompson. "Sir, we appreciate your opinion, but this is a family matter." Mr. Thompson looked at her with a sad smile. "You're right, ma'am. It is a family matter, and families are built on love and respect, not on lies and shame." When Mr. Thompson walked away from our table, the silence that remained was different from before. It was no longer an uncomfortable silence. It was a reflective silence, like when someone tells you a truth you didn't want to hear but needed to. Sam took advantage of that silence to do something that broke my heart in the most beautiful way. He climbed onto my lap and hugged me tightly. "Grandpa," he said loudly so everyone could hear, "I am proud of you. My teacher asked me what my grandpa does, and I told her he fixes cars and that he's the smartest person in the world." Tears started to stream down my cheeks. "Do you know what my teacher said?" Sam continued. "She said that grandpas who know how to fix things also know how to fix broken hearts." Jessica, who had been quiet during Mr. Thompson's entire intervention, finally spoke, but not to defend Ryan. "Edward," she said in a very soft voice, as if she were ashamed to speak, I knew someone was helping with Sam's expenses. I knew the school sometimes told us it was already paid for when we hadn't paid. I knew the doctor's visits were cheaper than they should have been." Ryan looked at her with a look of betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" he asked. Jessica looked at him with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "Because it was convenient for me to believe you could pay for everything yourself. Because I liked to show off that my husband was so successful he could maintain this lifestyle without help. But I always knew something was strange. Then something I never expected happened. Mr. Campbell, Jessica's father, that elegant man who had always spoken of Ryan as if he were the perfect son-in-law, stood up and walked to where I was sitting. "Edward," he said. "Can I call you Edward, right?" I nodded, confused. "Edward, I want to apologize to you. In my house, Ryan always told us he was self-made, that he had achieved everything on his own. Jessica and I believed that story because we liked to think our daughter had married a self-made man. But now I realize that the real story is much more beautiful than the one he told us." Mr. Campbell stood by my chair. "The real story is that of a father who sacrificed for his son. That is a story any family would be proud of." Mrs. Campbell, Jessica's mother, also approached our side of the table. "Edward," she said with a smile that was completely different from the forced one she had always given me, "in my family, we've always said that you know a man by what he does when no one is watching. You've been doing good things for your family for years, without anyone knowing, without expecting recognition. That speaks very well of you." Their words surprised me so much I didn't know what to say. For years, Jessica's parents had treated me as if I were inferior to them, as if I weren't worthy of being in their family. And there they were, acknowledging my worth in front of everyone. The most powerful moment came when one of Ryan's brothers-in-law, Albert, who had always been the most arrogant of them all, stood up and said something that changed the atmosphere of the entire table. "Ryan," he said to my son, "I always thought you were admirable for being self-made, but now I realize that what's admirable isn't that you're self-made. What's admirable is that you had a father who sacrificed so much for you, and what's sad is that you decided to hide that instead of being proud of it." Albert looked at me directly. "Mr. Edward, I come from a humble family, too. My father was a construction worker his whole life, but I have never been ashamed of him. On the contrary, I always tell my children that their grandfather built houses with his hands so that I could build my future with my mind. The energy at the table had completely changed. Those who once saw Ryan as an example of success now saw him as an ungrateful son. Those who once saw me as a burden now saw me as an admirable father. But the most important thing was that Sam, my little grandson, had heard the whole conversation, and now he understood why his grandfather had been so sad. "Daddy," Sam said to Ryan, with the brutal honesty that children have, "why didn't you tell me that my grandpa paid for my school? Why didn't you tell me that it's because of him that I can study at a nice school?" Ryan tried to answer, but he couldn't find the words. For the first time in years, my son was left without arguments, without lies, without excuses. He was left alone with the truth, and the truth was that he had been an ungrateful son to the father who had loved him the most in the world. After the whole table had heard the truth, after even Jessica's family had recognized me as the man I truly was, I stood up from my chair with a dignity I hadn't felt in years. Sam was still hugging me, and I held him in my arms as I had when he was smaller. "My son," I told my grandson, "your grandfather loves you very much, and everything I did for you I did with love. Never forget that." Sam hugged me tighter and whispered in my ear, "I love you too, Grandpa, and when I grow up, I'm going to be like you." Those words from my grandson gave me a strength I didn't know I had. They gave me the strength to do what I had to do, leave there with my head held high. I looked at Ryan one last time, and for the first time in years, I didn't look at him with sadness or pleading. I looked at him with the tranquility of a man who had told the whole truth and who had nothing left to prove. "Ryan," I said with a firm but hate-free voice, "for 35 years, I was your father. I changed your diapers when you were a baby. I carried you to the doctor when you were sick. I taught you how to ride a bike. I helped you with your homework. I sold everything I had so you could study. I did all of that because I loved you, not because I expected anything in return. But I did expect respect. I expected you not to be ashamed of me. I expected you not to erase me from your story." I paused for a moment to breathe. "Today you have taught me that a father's love is not always enough to raise a good son." Jessica was crying silently, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She had remained silent for years, knowing the truth but allowing Ryan to build his life on lies. "Jessica," I said, looking at her directly, "you knew I was helping. You knew there was a grandfather who loved his grandson so much that he secretly paid for his education. But you stayed quiet because it was convenient for your husband to seem more successful than he really was. Today, you have learned that false foundations, sooner or later, crumble." Jessica didn't answer, but she nodded, as if accepting her share of the blame for everything that had happened. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell approached me before I left. "Edward," Mr. Campbell said, "I don't know if this helps, but I want you to know that from now on, you will always be welcome in our home. We now understand who you really are, and we are very sorry to have unknowingly participated in this injustice." Mrs. Campbell added, "Sam is going to need his grandfather. Children need examples of hard-working and honest men like you. If Ryan and Jessica don't understand that, we do." Their words surprised me, but they also gave me hope. For the first time, I felt that maybe I hadn't completely lost my family. The most difficult moment came when I had to say goodbye to Sam. My grandson didn't understand why I had to leave. Why couldn't I stay for the birthday cake? Why was his dad so serious? "Grandpa," he said with those big, confused eyes, "are you not going to be able to visit me anymore?" I stroked his head and made him a promise I knew I would keep. "My sweet boy, your grandfather will always be here for you. Maybe I can't visit you at your house, but whenever you need me, you'll know where to find me. And when you're older, you'll understand everything that happened tonight." Sam hugged me tightly and said, "Can I come visit you at your house, Grandpa?" Before I could answer, Mrs. Campbell intervened. "Of course you can, Sam. Grandparents are for visiting." As I was heading towards the restaurant exit, Ryan finally got up and walked after me. "Dad, wait," he said in a voice that sounded like the child he had been many years ago. I stopped and turned to look at him. For the first time that night, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. "What do you want, Ryan?" I asked. My son was quiet for a moment, as if searching for the right words. I didn't want things to end like this," he finally said. "Oh, no?" I replied. "So how did you want them to end? Did you want me to keep paying your bills in secret while you humiliated me in front of your family?" Ryan looked down, and for a moment, I thought maybe he was going to apologize, that maybe he was going to admit his mistake. but his next words confirmed that my son had changed forever. "You just don't get it, Dad," he said. "In my job, in my social circle, having a mechanic for a father doesn't help. People judge by appearances. I needed to create an image of success." His words hurt me more than anything that had happened that night. "Ryan," I said with infinite sadness, "the problem isn't that you have a mechanic for a father. The problem is that you have a heart made of cardboard, and that can't be fixed with money or lies." I turned my back and continued walking towards the exit. When I reached the restaurant door, Mr. Thompson was waiting for me. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I want you to know that what you did tonight was very brave. Not many men have the courage to defend their dignity as you did." I thanked him for his words and shook his hand. "Mr. Thompson," I said, "sometimes a man needs to defend himself, even against his own family." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Your son lost a lot tonight, Mr. Miller. He lost the father who loved him unconditionally. I hope one day he realizes what he's lost." Those words stayed with me all the way home. When I got to my apartment, Linda was waiting up for me, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in her hands. "How did it go, Edward?" she asked, with a mix of hope and worry in her voice. I sat down next to her and told her everything that had happened. When I finished, Linda hugged me and said, "I'm proud of you, my love. You finally stood up for your dignity. You finally told the whole truth." That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. I slept with the peace of a man who had done the right thing, who had said what he needed to say, who had defended his honor. The following days were difficult, but also liberating. I no longer had to keep secrets. I no longer had to pay bills in secret. I no longer had to pretend it didn't hurt to be ignored by my son. For the first time in years, I could use my money on myself, on Linda, on fixing up our apartment, on treating ourselves to small pleasures we hadn't been able to afford for years because all my money went to helping Ryan without him knowing. Linda and I started planning a trip back to my hometown, to visit my parents' graves, to reconnect with my roots, with the dignity of honest work they had taught me. I realized I had spent so many years living for my son that I had forgotten to live for myself. A week after the dinner at the restaurant, I received a call that changed my perspective on everything. It was Mrs. Campbell, Jessica's mother. "Edward," she said, "Sam has been asking about you every day. Yesterday he told me he wants to learn how to fix cars like his grandpa. Would it be okay if I brought him to visit you on Saturday?" That call filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that, although I had lost my son, maybe I could get my grandson back. I realized that my story didn't end with Ryan's ingratitude, but continued with Sam's love. On Saturday, when my grandson arrived at my house and asked me to teach him how an engine works, I felt that my whole life had been worth it. I felt that I had planted a seed in that boy's heart, a seed of respect, of gratitude, of love for honest work, and I realized that this was the true inheritance I could leave him. Not money, but values. Not lies about easy success, but the truth about hard work and dignity. That night at the restaurant changed my life forever. I learned that sometimes you have to lose someone to find yourself. I learned that true love is not always returned, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth giving. I learned that a man's dignity is not measured by the money in his bank account, but by the honesty with which he lives his life. Today, 6 months later, I am a different man. I'm still a mechanic. I still live in my small apartment. My hands are still rough from work, but I am no longer the invisible father, the ghost grandfather, the man who hides to help. Now I am Edward Miller, a man who respects himself and demands respect from others. Sam comes to visit me every Saturday. He is learning to use basic tools. He is learning the story of his great-grandfather who forged copper. He is understanding that honest work is the foundation of a dignified life. And when he grows up, he will tell a different story. He will tell the story of a grandfather who loved him unconditionally, who taught him real values, who showed him that true wealth is in the heart. And you? What would you do if you were me? Would you stay silent if someone erased all your sacrifices from their story? Would you continue to help in silence someone who is ashamed of you? Or would you defend your dignity, even if it meant losing the person you love most? If this story touched your heart, comment below and tell us where you're listening from. Sometimes, knowing that there are people who understand our pain gives us the strength to move forward. And don't forget to subscribe, because every day there is a new story that could be yours.